I was standing at my own front door when I realized I was dead. At least that's what my daughter-in-law had told everyone. The medical transport van pulled away behind me, its red taillights disappearing into the autumn twilight. I stood there on the sidewalk with my walker, staring at the house I'd lived in for 37 years, and something felt wrong. The porch. Someone had painted my porch. The deep burgundy I'd chosen with Marcus back in 2010 was gone, replaced with a trendy charcoal gray. My rose bushes, the ones I'd babied through every Chicago winter since James was in high school, had been ripped out and replaced with ornamental grasses that swayed in the October wind like they belonged there. My name is Dorothy Washington. I'm 68 years old. 4 months ago, I had a stroke while grocery shopping at the Jewel on 87th Street. 1 minute I was comparing prices on sweet potatoes, and the next minute I was on the floor with the left side of my face feeling like it had melted off my skull. They told me later that a stock boy named Deshaun called 911 and held my hand until the paramedics arrived. I never got to thank him. 4 months in rehabilitation, 4 months of physical therapy, speech therapy, relearning how to hold a fork and button my own shirt. 4 months of my daughter-in-law, Crystal, promising she'd handle everything while I recovered. 4 months of my son, James, visiting less and less, always with excuses about Crystal needing him, about work being busy, about getting the house ready for my return. But there was something my dear Crystal didn't know. Something she couldn't have known because she was too busy playing the concerned daughter-in-law to pay attention to the details of my life. There was something waiting for me that would change everything. I just didn't know it yet. I pulled my coat tighter against the wind and shuffled toward the front steps with my walker. Each step was still difficult, my left leg dragging slightly the way it had since the stroke. The physical therapist said I was doing remarkably well for my age, that some people never regain this much mobility, but I didn't feel remarkable. I felt tired. I felt old, and I felt like a stranger approaching my own home. The key didn't work. I stood there on my newly painted porch, trying to fit my house key into the lock, and it wouldn't turn. I tried again, thinking maybe my hands weren't as steady as I thought. Nothing. The lock had been changed. Oh my God, oh my sweet Jesus. The voice came from next door. I turned to see Ms. Ernestine Johnson standing on her porch, one hand clutching her chest, the other gripping her porch railing. Ms. Johnson was 73, had lived next door to me since 1987, and in that moment she looked like she'd seen a ghost. "Ms. Johnson," I called out. "It's me, Dorothy. I'm home from—" But she was already stumbling backward, her face gone completely pale. She groped for her front door, never taking her eyes off me, and disappeared inside her house so fast you'd think I was the devil himself. I stood there confused, my walker planted on the porch, the October wind cutting through my coat. What in the world was wrong with Ernestine? The answer came 5 minutes later when she emerged from her house with her nephew Marcus, a tall man in his 40s who worked as a paramedic. He approached me slowly, like you'd approach a wild animal, while Ms. Johnson stayed on her porch, both hands now covering her mouth. "Ma'am," Marcus said carefully, "I'm going to need you to tell me your name." "Marcus, boy, you know who I am. I'm Dorothy Washington. I've known you since you were in diapers running around this yard." He stopped walking. His eyes went wide. That's not possible." "What's not possible? I had a stroke, not a personality transplant. Now can somebody tell me why my locks have been changed and why Ernestine looks at me like I'm Freddy Krueger?" Marcus and Ms. Johnson exchanged a look that made my stomach drop. It was the kind of look people share at funerals. The kind of look that says someone needs to deliver bad news and nobody wants to be the one to do it. "Ms. Dorothy," Marcus said slowly, we were told you passed away 2 months ago. We went to your funeral." The world tilted. I heard the words, but they didn't make sense. They were sounds without meaning, like someone speaking a foreign language. My funeral. They went to my funeral. "That's not possible," I whispered. But Ms. Johnson was already crying, tears streaming down her face as she walked toward me. "Child, we mourned you. The whole church mourned you. Crystal said you had another stroke at the facility and didn't make it. She said you went peacefully in your sleep. She said you were at peace with Marcus now." The October wind suddenly felt like January. Miss Cree? Johnson's living room smelled the same as it always had, lavender, potpourri, and bungay. She sat me down on her plastic-covered sofa and made me sweet tea with too much sugar, the way she'd been making it for 37 years. Her hands shook as she poured, the teacup rattling against the saucer. "Tell me everything," I said, and she did. Crystal had called the church prayer circle first. It was a Tuesday evening, Ms. Johnson remembered, because that was bingo night at the senior center, and she'd almost missed the call. Crystal's voice had been tearful, breaking at all the right moments. Dorothy had taken a turn for the worse. Another stroke. The doctors couldn't save her. She'd passed away peacefully with James by her side. No, there was no need for anyone to come to the facility. Everything had happened so fast. The funeral was held at Greater Mount Zion Baptist Church, where I'd been a member for 42 years. Crystal had arranged everything. Closed casket, she'd said, because I'd looked so frail at the end and she wanted people to remember me as I was. The church was packed. Pastor Williams gave the eulogy. The choir sang, "Precious Lord, take my hand." People brought food to the repast. Someone set up a donation jar for funeral expenses, and the community had contributed over $15,000. "She cried the whole time," Ms. Johnson said, shaking her head. "Crystal did. She stood there at your casket and cried like her heart was breaking. We all felt so sorry for her, having to plan everything while James was too torn up to help." "Where was James?" I asked. Ms. Johnson hesitated. "He was there, baby. He was there, but he seemed distant. Like he wasn't really present, you know? He didn't cry, he didn't speak. He just sat in the front pew like a statue while Crystal handled everything. We thought he was in shock from losing you so soon after losing his daddy." I sat there on that plastic-covered sofa, drinking too sweet tea, and tried to process what I was hearing. My daughter-in-law had faked my death. She'd held a funeral. She'd collected money from my church family, from people who'd known me for decades, from people who'd brought casseroles to my house when Marcus died, and watched James grow up and prayed over me every time I had so much as a cold. She'd erased me. "What happened to my house?" I asked quietly. Ms. Johnson's face changed. James and Crystal moved in about 3 weeks after the funeral, said it was too hard to keep two places, and your house was paid off. Crystal said you'd wanted them to have it, that it was in your will. My will. The one I'd made 10 years ago that left everything to James in a trust, with specific instructions that he couldn't touch the principal until he was 40. The one Marcus and I had set up with our attorney to make sure our son would always be taken care of, but wouldn't be taken advantage of. "Ms. Johnson," I said carefully, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Did Marcus ever give you anything to hold for me? Any papers or keys or—" "The safe deposit box key," she said immediately. "Marcus gave it to me the week before he died. Made me promise not to tell anyone, not even you, unless something happened and you needed it. He said if you ever asked me about it, I'd know it was serious." My heart was pounding. Marcus had always been careful, always planning ahead. Even in death, he was trying to protect me. "I need that key, Ms. Johnson." She got up without a word and disappeared into her bedroom. I sat there on her sofa, looking out her window at my house, the house that was no longer mine according to everyone in this neighborhood, the house where Marcus and I had made love and fought and laughed and raised our son, the house where I'd planned to grow old and die and be buried from, the house my daughter-in-law had stolen while pretending I was already dead. Ms. Johnson came back with a small envelope. Inside was a key and a piece of paper with Marcus's handwriting. "Continental Bank, Box 247. Dorothy will know what to do." I looked up at Ms. Johnson, and for the first time since arriving home, I felt something other than shock. I felt something cold and clear and sharp. I felt ready. I need to tell you something about my late husband, Marcus. He was the kind of man who smiled easy but watched everything. He'd grown up poor in the Robert Taylor homes, back when the projects were so dangerous that ambulances wouldn't go in without police escorts. He'd seen friends die, seen families destroyed by drugs and violence and poverty, and he'd promised himself that any family he made would never go through that. So Marcus worked. He drove a truck for UPS for 33 years, and he invested every extra penny he made. While other people were buying new cars and taking vacations, Marcus was buying property. Small houses in neighborhoods that white folks had abandoned. Houses that we could rent out to families who needed a place to live. By the time he died 3 years ago, we owned our home free and clear, and 3 rental properties that brought in enough money every month for us to live comfortably. Marcus had taught James about money, about investing, about building generational wealth. But James had always been more interested in looking successful than being successful. He wanted the nice car, the nice clothes, the pretty wife who turned heads. When he brought Crystal home 5 years ago, Marcus and I had both seen what she was. But James was 30 years old, and we'd raised him to make his own decisions. Even the wrong ones. Now I was sitting in Ms. Johnson's living room, holding a key that Marcus had left me, and I understood. My husband had known. Somehow, some way, Marcus had known that someone might try to take what we'd built, and he'd left me a way to fight back. "Ms. Johnson," I said, "I need to stay here for a few days. I need to make some phone calls, and I need you to not tell anyone, and I mean anyone, that I'm alive and back in town." She looked at me with wide eyes. "Dorothy, what are you going to do?" I thought about Crystal crying at my fake funeral. I thought about her collecting $15,000 from people who could barely afford it. I thought about her moving into my house, sleeping in my bed, living my life. I'm going to teach my daughter-in-law the difference between being dead and being dangerous. Ms. Johnson's eyes lit up with something that looked like satisfaction. Marcus always said you had steel in your spine. He didn't know the half of it. The next morning, I made a phone call to Patricia Henderson. Pat and I had gone to nursing school together back in 1975, before she realized she hated blood and switched to law school. Now she was one of the best elder law attorneys in Chicago, and she'd handled Marcus's estate when he died. "Dorothy!" Pat's voice came through the phone like a scream. "Girl, I thought you were dead." Crystal said, "I know what Crystal said, and that's exactly what we need to talk about. Pat, I need you to come to Ms. Johnson's house, and I need you to not tell anyone you're coming." There was a long pause. How dead are you supposed to be? Dead enough that they had a funeral? Sweet Jesus. Another pause. "I'll be there in an hour." While I waited, I sat at Ms. Johnson's kitchen table and made a list. Every property Marcus and I owned, every bank account, every asset, everything Crystal would have tried to get her hands on while I was dead. The anger that had started as a cold, sharp feeling was growing into something bigger, something patient, something that knew exactly how to wait for the perfect moment. Because there was something Crystal hadn't counted on, something she couldn't have known when she decided to erase me from the world. I wasn't just Dorothy Washington, grieving widow and stroke victim. I was Dorothy Washington, daughter of sharecroppers who'd migrated north during the second wave of the Great Migration. Granddaughter of a woman who'd walked off a plantation in Mississippi with nothing but the clothes on her back and 2 babies in her arms. Great-granddaughter of people who'd survived slavery itself. My people didn't die easy, and we sure as hell didn't stay dead. Before we continue with what happened when Pat arrived, let me ask you, have you ever had someone underestimate you because of your age? Have you ever watched someone take advantage of an elderly person in your family? Drop your story in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this story of justice and revenge, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss what Dorothy does next. Now, let's get back to how a 68-year-old woman who was supposed to be dead became the most dangerous person Crystal had ever met. Pat arrived at Ms. Johnson's house 53 minutes after I called her. I watched through the kitchen window as she parked her silver Lexus 2 houses down and walked up the sidewalk carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Pat had done well for herself. Designer suits, expensive car, downtown law office with her name on the door. But she was still the same girl who'd snuck cigarettes with me behind the nursing school dormitory in 1975. She hugged me so tight I thought my ribs would crack. Girl, when Crystal called my office 6 weeks ago asking about the estate, I should have known something was wrong, Pat said, finally releasing me. She said you'd had another stroke and weren't expected to make it, wanted to know about getting James set up as executor. I told her she'd need documentation from the doctors and your signature on new power of attorney papers. Did she get them? Pat's face went hard. She showed up at my office 3 days later with a notarized power of attorney document with your signature on it. Dorothy. I compared it to your signature on file. It was good. Really good. If I hadn't known you for 45 years, I might have believed it. We sat down at Ms. Johnson's kitchen table, and I told them everything. The stroke, the rehabilitation facility, coming home to find my locks changed and my life erased. Pat took notes in a legal pad, her pen flying across the paper, stopping me occasionally to ask questions that got more and more specific. Did Crystal visit you in rehab? Twice. Once right after the stroke and once about 6 weeks ago. Both times she asked me to sign papers, said they were for insurance, for the rehabilitation facility billing. I was so foggy from the medication, I barely remember what I signed. Pat's jaw tightened. That's when she got the signatures. She probably had you sign blank forms or layered documents so you couldn't see what you were actually signing. Can we prove that? We can try, but Dorothy, I need to tell you something. If Crystal did this right, and from what you're describing, she planned this carefully, she's probably already transferred assets. The house, the rental properties, bank accounts. She's had 4 months with everyone thinking you were dead or dying. That's a lot of time. The anger that had been cold and sharp was heating up now, turning into something that burned behind my sternum. Then we need to find out exactly what she's taken and how she's taken it. Pat nodded. I'll start pulling records, property transfers, court filings, bank activity. Everything she's done left a paper trail, even if she thinks she covered it up. But Dorothy, this is going to take time, and you need to decide. Do you want to move fast and loud or slow and quiet? I thought about Crystal crying at my fake funeral, about her collecting money from my church family, about her sleeping in my bed and wearing my life like a costume. Slow and quiet, I said. I want to know everything she's done before she knows I'm coming for her. Ms. Johnson, who'd been listening silently, spoke up. You need a place to stay while you're gathering evidence. You can stay here as long as you need. I appreciate that, Ms. Johnson, but people are going to start seeing me. The neighborhood will know I'm alive by tomorrow. Let them know, Pat said. But let's control the narrative. You were in extended rehabilitation. Crystal was mistaken about your prognosis. These things happen with elderly patients. Confusion about medical conditions, miscommunication between facilities. We play it as an honest mistake until we're ready to show it wasn't. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a ghost in my own life. I stayed at Ms. Johnson's house during the day, watching my property through her kitchen window like it was a surveillance operation. I saw Crystal come and go, always dressed in my clothes. The good ones I saved for church and special occasions. She'd drive off in my car, the Mercedes that Marcus and I had bought to celebrate our 40th anniversary, the one I'd barely driven because I preferred my old Honda. But it was the other car that made me pay attention. A black Cadillac Escalade with temporary tags that would pull up around 3 in the afternoon. After Crystal got home, but before James would arrive from work, a man would get out, tall, light-skinned, wearing expensive suits that didn't quite fit right. He'd look around the neighborhood like he owned it, then disappear into my house for an hour, sometimes 2. Miss Johnson, I asked one afternoon, "Have you seen that man before?" She snorted. "That's Crystal's cousin, Marcus. Started showing up about 2 months ago. Said he was helping with your estate paperwork." Marcus. She'd given her boyfriend my husband's name. Pat was doing her own surveillance, the kind that happened in courthouse basements and online databases. She'd call me every evening with updates, and each update made the picture clearer and uglier. Dorothy. Crystal's real name is Crystal Denise Patterson, but she's also been Crystal Montgomery and Crystal Hayes. She married Charles Montgomery in 2008. He was a widower, 72 years old, owned a plumbing business in Gary, Indiana. 2 years after they married, Charles signed over his business to Crystal. 6 months later, he died in a fall down the basement stairs of their home. The death was ruled accidental. My blood went cold. She killed him? Couldn't prove it. But here's what's interesting. Crystal tried to collect on his life insurance, but the insurance company denied the claim because Charles had changed the beneficiary to his daughter from his first marriage 3 days before he died. Crystal got the business, but the daughter got the insurance money. They settled out of court. And the second husband? Robert Hayes, married in 2012. He was 65, owned 3 dry cleaning stores in Calumet City. Similar pattern. 2 years of marriage, he signed over 2 of the stores to Crystal, then filed for divorce claiming she'd been stealing from the businesses. He died before the divorce was finalized. Heart attack. Again, nothing proven, but Crystal walked away with 2 dry cleaning stores. I sat there holding the phone, feeling sick. "Pat, my son married a serial killer." "We don't know that for sure. But we do know she's a serial con artist who targets older men with property. And Dorothy..." Pat paused. "There's something else. Crystal has a fraud conviction from 2006 under her birth name, Patterson. She did 18 months for insurance fraud and identity theft. That's probably why she changed her name to Montgomery after the first marriage. Does James know any of this? I doubt it. She probably told him she was a widow, that her previous husbands died tragically, and your son, bless his heart, believed her because he wanted to." That night, I lay awake in Miss Johnson's guest room, staring at the ceiling, thinking about my son. James had always been trusting, had always wanted to see the best in people. Marcus used to worry about it, used to say that James needed to develop a harder edge to survive in this world. But we'd raised him to be kind, to be generous, to believe in people, and now that kindness was being used to destroy him. The next day, Pat called with more news. "I found Crystal's boyfriend. His name is Marcus Jr. Wilson, goes by MJ. He's got a record: con game, forgery, theft by deception. He did 4 years in Stateville for running a real estate scam where he'd convince elderly homeowners to sign over deeds by claiming he was helping them avoid foreclosure. Dorothy, he's done this before, multiple times. So she has a partner. More than that, I did some digging and I found their pattern. Crystal marries the Mark, gains his trust, gets him to sign over assets. Then MJ creates shell companies to hide the property transfers. They wait until the Mark dies or can be pushed out. Then they flip the properties and disappear. They've been working together since at least 2010. I thought about that Cadillac Escalade parked in my driveway, about MJ walking into my house like he owned it, about Crystal wearing my clothes and sleeping in my bed and playing the grieving widow while planning to steal everything Marcus and I had built. How much have they taken so far? Pat's voice got quiet. "Dorothy, I need you to sit down for this." I was already sitting, but I gripped the edge of Ms. Johnson's kitchen table anyway. "Your house is still in your name, but there's a quitclaim deed filed 2 weeks ago transferring it to James. The 3 rental properties have been transferred to a company called Prestige Property Holdings, LLC. The company was created 6 weeks ago, and Crystal is listed as the registered agent. Your savings account at First National, the one with $127,000 that you and Marcus built up, has been drained to $3,400. The money was transferred in increments over the past 3 months to various accounts." The room spun. "What about the account Marcus set up in my maiden name, the one at Continental Bank?" "Still there, still untouched. She doesn't know about it." "Thank you, Marcus. Thank you for always planning ahead. Pat, how much time do we have before she tries to sell the properties? Based on the pattern from her previous cons? Not long. Once she's transferred everything and feels secure, she'll push James for a divorce, take half of everything in the settlement, and disappear. I'd guess we have maybe 3 to 4 months before she moves into the endgame. 3 to 4 months. That's how long I had to take back my life from a woman who'd already killed at least one husband and destroyed several others. Then we need to move faster, I said. But carefully. Pat, I need you to file paperwork freezing any further property transfers. Can you do that without Crystal knowing? I can file emergency petitions claiming elder abuse and potential fraud. But Dorothy, once I do that, Crystal will know someone's watching. She'll know someone suspects. Good, I said. Let her know. Let her start to worry. People make mistakes when they're worried. That Sunday, I made my decision. I'd been dead for 2 months. It was time to resurrect myself. Greater Mount Zion Baptist Church sits on the corner of 87th and South Chicago Avenue, a brick building that's been standing since 1952. I've been a member since 1983, back when Pastor William's father was still preaching and the choir wore different robes. I've sung in that choir, taught Sunday school in that basement, and fed half the congregation from that kitchen. If anywhere was my home besides my actual house, it was Greater Mount Zion. So when I walked through those doors on Sunday morning, using my walker but holding my head high, wearing the purple dress I'd asked Ms. Johnson to bring from my house, I knew exactly what would happen. Sister Martha Freeman saw me first. She was standing in the foyer, greeting people as they arrived, and when her eyes landed on me, her mouth dropped open so wide I could see her back molars. The visitor welcome brochures she was holding fluttered to the floor like dying birds. "Dorothy?" she whispered. "Good morning, Sister Martha. Beautiful day the Lord has made, isn't it? But we thought you were dead?" I smiled. "Not yet. The Lord's not finished with me." The word spread through that church like fire through dry grass. By the time I made it to my usual pew, 4th row from the front, right side, the entire congregation was buzzing. People were crying, hugging me, touching me like they needed to make sure I was real. Sister Johnson grabbed my face and kissed both my cheeks. Deacon Morrison started praying out loud, thanking Jesus for miracles. And then I saw her. Crystal was sitting in the front row, the row reserved for family of deceased members being honored. She was wearing black, still in mourning for me, apparently. Her face, when she turned and saw me, was a masterpiece. Shock, then confusion, then something that looked like panic before she schooled her features into something resembling joy. She rushed down the aisle, her heels clicking on the wooden floor. "Mom, oh my God, Mom!" She threw her arms around me and I let her, feeling her heart pound against my chest like a trapped bird. "I thought we'd lost you. The facility called and said you'd had another stroke, that you weren't going to make it. I was so confused when you disappeared, I thought—" "It was all a misunderstanding, baby," I said, pulling back to look at her. Up close, I could see the panic in her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands. There was another patient named Dorothy Washington. Poor thing passed away and somehow the wires got crossed. By the time they realized the mistake, I was already transferred to another facility for extended therapy. The lie came easy. Pat and I had crafted it carefully, giving Crystal an out, a way to claim innocence. Because the goal wasn't to expose her yet, the goal was to get close to her. "But the funeral," Sister Martha said, still crying. "We had a funeral." Crystal's laugh was high and brittle. "I know. I feel so foolish. When the facility called, I panicked. I thought Dorothy had died and I wanted to give her a proper service. I should have verified everything first, but I was so grief-stricken, I wasn't thinking clearly. She was good. I had to give her that. She'd pivoted fast, turned her con into an honest mistake, played the distraught daughter-in-law who'd been misinformed. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed her myself. Pastor Williams called me up to the pulpit during service. The whole congregation stood and applauded as I made my way forward with my walker, each step deliberate and slow. I milked it, playing up the fragile elder who'd miraculously survived. Saints, Pastor Williams said, his voice booming through the sanctuary. "We are witnessing a miracle today. Sister Dorothy Washington, who we mourned and buried." He paused, realizing his mistake. "Who we thought we buried has been returned to us by God's grace." The congregation erupted in amens and hallelujahs. I took the microphone, my hand shaking just slightly, partly genuine from the stroke, partly performance. "I want to thank everyone who prayed for me during my illness. The Lord has been good to me. He's given me a second chance at life, and I intend to use it wisely." I looked directly at Crystal when I said that last part. Her smile never wavered, but I saw her jaw tighten. After service, during the repast in the church basement, I worked the room. Everyone wanted to hear about my miraculous recovery, and I told them about the confusion at the facility, about the stroke affecting my memory, about being transferred between hospitals and rehabilitation centers in a fog of medication and confusion. "I'm still not quite right in the head," I said, tapping my temple. "The doctor says my memory might be spotty for a while. Sometimes I forget things, or I get confused about what happened when, but I'm grateful to be alive." I watched Crystal relax slightly as I said this. A Dorothy with memory problems was a Dorothy who might not remember what she'd signed or agreed to. A Dorothy with cognitive issues was a Dorothy who could be manipulated. Perfect. "Mom," Crystal said, pulling me aside after I'd made my rounds, "we need to talk about your living situation. James and I have been staying at your house, our house, taking care of it for you. But now that you're back, we should figure out arrangements." "Arrangements?" "Well, you signed the house over to James before you went to the facility. Don't you remember? You said you wanted him to have it, that you wanted to make sure everything was settled. You were so worried about estate taxes and making sure James was taken care of if anything happened to you." I let my face go confused. "Did I? I don't remember that." "The stroke probably affected your memory, but don't worry, Mom. We have all the paperwork. Everything's legal and proper. James and I want you to stay with us, of course. It's your home. Well, technically it's James's home now, but you know what I mean." Technically. Everything about Crystal was technical, legal, covered by paperwork that she'd forged or coerced. "That's so kind of you, baby," I said. "I'd love to stay with you and James. Where would I sleep?" "The guest room," she said quickly. "We can fix it up nice for you. Make sure you have everything you need." The guest room. In my own house, I would be a guest. "That sounds perfect," I said, squeezing her hand. "I'm so grateful to have family who cares about me." Her smile was radiant. "Of course, Mom, your family." Moving back into my own house as a guest was one of the strangest experiences of my life. Crystal and James picked me up from Ms. Johnson's the next evening. My son hugged me tight, and for the first time in months, I saw tears in his eyes. "Mom, I thought I'd lost you," he said. "When Crystal told me you'd passed, I felt like my whole world ended." "I'm here, baby," I said, holding him. "I'm here." But as we drove to the house, I noticed how distant he seemed, how he barely looked at Crystal, how his jaw stayed tight, how his hands gripped the steering wheel like he was hanging on for dear life. Something had changed in my son, and I didn't think it was just grief. The guest room had been redecorated. My sewing machine was gone, my craft supplies cleared out. In their place was a hospital bed with rails, a bedside commode, and a wheelchair. "We wanted to make sure you had everything you needed for your recovery," Crystal said, gesturing to the room like she was showing off a hotel suite. "It's perfect," I lied. That night, I lay in that hospital bed in my own house, listening to Crystal and James argue in the master bedroom. The walls were thin, and their voices carried. "I told you this was a bad idea," James was saying. "My mother is alive, Crystal. She's alive, and we had a funeral for her. Do you know how that looks?" It was an honest mistake. How was I supposed to know the facility mixed up patients? "You could have verified. You could have asked to see her body. You could have—" "Don't you dare blame me for this. I was trying to protect you, trying to make sure everything was handled if the worst happened. You're the one who insisted we move into this house. You're the one who wanted—" "That's not how I remember it." There was a long silence. James, baby, you've been under so much stress. First your father dying, then your mother's stroke. Maybe you're not remembering things clearly. The same thing she'd said to me about my memory. Crystal had a pattern. When cornered, she blamed confusion, stress, misremembering. She gaslit people until they doubted their own minds. But I wasn't going to let her do that to my son. The next morning, I discovered Crystal's routine. She'd get up early, make coffee, and spend an hour on her phone in the kitchen before James woke up. I'd shuffle out with my walker, playing the Grateful Elder, and she'd smile and offer me coffee and ask how I slept. And I'd listen. I'd listen to her phone conversations when she thought I was too deaf or too confused to pay attention. The properties are fine. Everything's transferred. I know, baby. But she showed up, and now we have to play it cool. No, she doesn't remember anything. The stroke affected her memory. Give me 2 more months and we can move forward with the plan. I love you too. Baby. She called him baby. She called MJ baby while my son slept in the next room. I'd smile and sip my coffee and shuffle back to my room, and then I'd pull out the recording device Pat had given me, a small digital recorder that looked like a hearing aid. Every conversation, every phone call, every whispered word when Crystal thought I wasn't listening. Evidence. I was collecting evidence. By the end of the second week living back in my house, I had recorded 15 phone conversations between Crystal and MJ. I'd taken pictures of documents she left out, property transfers, LLC paperwork, bank statements. I'd watched as she showed MJ my house, pointing out features, discussing market value, talking about how much they could get for it. In my own house, I was a spy. And Crystal had no idea. Victory doesn't always come with trumpets and fanfare. Sometimes it comes in quiet moments, small wins that build into something bigger. Sometimes it comes in the form of a funeral program that you just happen to leave on the coffee table, where Sister Martha Freeman can see it when she stops by to check on you. Dorothy, Sister Martha said, picking up the program with the picture of me on the front, the picture Crystal had chosen, the obituary Crystal had written. Where did you get this? I found it in my room, I said, making my voice confused and shaky. I don't understand why there's a program with my picture on it. Sister Martha? Did I miss something? Did somebody die? Her face went pale. Baby, this is from your funeral, the one we had when we thought you'd passed. My funeral? I let my hands shake as I took the program from her. People came to my funeral? There's an obituary here. It says I died peacefully in my sleep, but I didn't die. I'm right here. Crystal said it was a mistake, that the facility mixed up patients. But it has my picture, my real picture. How did they get my picture if I didn't die? I watched the wheels turn in Sister Martha's head. She was one of the sharpest women in the congregation, ran the church finances, and didn't miss a penny. And right now, she was realizing that something didn't add up. Dorothy, where did you say you found this? In my room. There was a whole box of them in the closet. I think Crystal was going to throw them away. Sister Martha's lips pressed into a thin line. I'm going to make some phone calls. Victory number 1. By that Sunday, the whispers had started. How could Crystal have gotten Dorothy's picture if it was just a patient mix-up? How could she have written a whole obituary with accurate details about Dorothy's life if she didn't know for sure Dorothy was dead? Why would she have printed programs and held a full funeral without verifying the death? And the donations. What about those donations? Crystal felt the pressure. I could see it in the way she moved through the church, the way she avoided certain people, the way her smile got tighter and tighter as more people asked pointed questions about the funeral expenses and where that money had gone. Pastor Williams pulled her aside after service. Sister Crystal, several members have asked me about the funeral donation fund. They'd like to know how those funds were used, given that Sister Dorothy is alive and well. Of course, Pastor, Crystal said smoothly. I'll prepare a full accounting. The money went to the funeral home, the repast catering, the programs. There are receipts for everything. I'm sure there are, Pastor Williams said, but the congregation would feel better if those funds were returned, since there was no actual funeral needed. Crystal's face went tight. Returned? It seems like the right thing to do, given the circumstances. That night, I heard Crystal on the phone with MJ, her voice pitched low and angry. They want me to return $15,000. I don't have $15,000. We already moved that money into the LLC account. I can't use the property money. That's for the final push. We need to move faster, MJ. Things are getting complicated. Good. Let her feel pressure. Let her make mistakes. Victory number 2 came through Facebook, of all places. Pat had helped me create a profile, and I'd been spending my days in the guest room, supposedly napping but actually searching for information about Crystal and MJ. I found Crystal's ex-sister-in-law, the daughter of Charles Montgomery, the first husband who died in that convenient fall down the basement stairs. Her name was Denise Montgomery Clark, and she lived in Gary, Indiana. I sent her a message. Dear Denise, my name is Dorothy Washington. I believe your father was married to a woman named Crystal Patterson, who now goes by Crystal Washington. I'd like to speak with you about your experiences with her if you're willing. Please call me. She called 2 hours later. Is Crystal trying to take your property? Denise asked without preamble. Something like that. That woman killed my father. Denise's voice was flat, certain. I can't prove it, but I know she did. My daddy was healthy, strong. He'd been working construction his whole life. His balance was perfect. But 2 weeks after he signed over his plumbing business to her, he suddenly falls down the basement stairs and breaks his neck. And Crystal was the only witness? Did you tell the police? Of course I did. They investigated, but they couldn't prove anything. Crystal cried and played the grieving widow, said my daddy had been dizzy lately, said he'd been forgetting to eat, making him weak. She painted a picture of an elderly man declining, even though he'd just passed his physical for his CDL license the month before. But she didn't get his life insurance. No, and she was furious about that. My daddy changed his beneficiary 3 days before he died. I think he finally saw what she was. But it was too late. She'd already gotten the business. She sold it 6 months later for $300,000 and disappeared. Denise, would you be willing to testify about this if I needed you to? Absolutely. That woman needs to be stopped before she kills someone else. After we hung up, I sat in my guest room holding my phone, thinking about how close Crystal had come to making James sign over everything, thinking about how convenient it would have been if I died in that rehabilitation facility, if that second stroke Crystal mentioned had actually happened, thinking about how easy it would be to make a weak, elderly stroke victim die peacefully in their sleep. Victory number 3 was the hardest because it involved my son. I had to plant seeds without pushing too hard, had to make him question without making him defensive. James still loved Crystal, or at least he thought he did. He'd built his identity around being a successful man with a beautiful wife, and admitting he'd been conned would mean admitting he'd been a fool. So I went slow. James, baby, can you help me understand something? I asked one Sunday afternoon when Crystal was out. Before my stroke, did I talk to you about signing over the house? He paused, his hand frozen halfway to his coffee cup. Yeah, Mom, you said you wanted to make sure everything was settled, that you didn't want me to have to deal with probate if something happened to you. What exactly did I say? You said. He frowned. Actually, I don't remember you saying it. Crystal told me you'd talked to her about it, that you'd asked her to handle the paperwork because you were too tired to deal with lawyers. I talked to Crystal about it, not you? Yeah. She said you'd gotten emotional, talking about Dad and how you wanted to make sure I was taken care of the way he'd been taking care of you. I let that sit there between us. James, did you ever wonder why I'd talk to Crystal about something that important instead of talking to you directly? His face changed, just slightly, just enough to let me know the seed had been planted. The stroke had already started affecting you, Mom. You weren't always clear. Maybe, I said. Or maybe my memory isn't as bad as people think it is. I left him with that thought and shuffled back to my room, knowing he'd chew on it, knowing doubt was a slow poison that worked better than any direct accusation. Victory number 4 came when I found the LLC paperwork. Crystal had gotten sloppy, left a folder out on the kitchen table while she was in the shower. Prestige Property Holdings, LLC, registered agent Crystal Washington. Business address, a P.O. box in Calumet City. Assets, 3 residential properties on the south side of Chicago, total value approximately $850,000. My 3 rental properties, the ones Marcus and I had bought and maintained and used to build generational wealth for our son. I took pictures of every page and texted them to Pat. Her response was immediate. We've got her. But I wasn't done yet. Victory number 5 came the following week when I took my walker and shuffled down to the corner store, where I knew Mr. Peterson, the owner, had a nephew in real estate. I'd been seeing cars stop at my rental properties, people getting out with clipboards, taking pictures. Mr. Peterson, I said, has anyone been showing houses on this block? Yeah, Dorothy. Some real estate lady has been bringing people by your rentals. Says she's the property manager looking for buyers. She's offering them well below market value. I think she wants a quick sale. This real estate lady, is she young, pretty, light-skinned? That's her. She told Mr. Chen at the laundromat that she was selling for an elderly owner who needed to liquidate assets for medical care. An elderly owner. Me. Crystal was selling my properties out from under me while I was still alive, telling buyers I needed the money for care. Mr. Peterson, do me a favor. If you see her again, can you get her card? I'd like to know which agency she's working with. Sure thing. Dorothy. She wasn't working with an agency. She was working alone, pocketing the money, planning to disappear before anyone realized the properties had been sold fraudulently. And she was getting desperate, offering below market value to move them fast, which meant she knew time was running out. Pat filed the motions on a Thursday morning, quietly and without fanfare. Emergency petition to freeze all property transfers, request for investigation into potential elder abuse and fraud, motion to require accounting of all funds removed from Dorothy Washington's accounts. She filed them in Cook County Circuit Court, and by law, Crystal had to be notified. The process server showed up at my house on Friday afternoon while Crystal was in the kitchen making lunch. I watched from my room as she opened the door, all smiles, expecting a delivery maybe, or a neighbor stopping by. Her face when she read those papers was beautiful. "What the fuck is this?" she said, her careful grammar disappearing as she slammed the door closed. I shuffled out into the hallway. "What's wrong, dear?" "Nothing." She shoved the papers into her purse. "Just some junk mail." But her hands were shaking, and her voice had gone up half an octave. She grabbed her phone and locked herself in the bathroom, and I could hear her furious whisper through the door. "Someone filed a petition to freeze the properties. I don't know who. It says interested party. Of course it's her. Who else would it be? But I thought you said she had memory problems. We need to move now, MJ. Forget the divorce. Forget the plan. We need to sell those houses this week and get out." I shuffled back to my room, smiling. Let her panic. Let her rush. People who rush make mistakes. That night, I started having senior moments at dinner. Loud, public senior moments where I'd suddenly remember things Crystal probably wished I'd forgotten. "Crystal, dear, wasn't there a funeral? I keep having this dream about people at a funeral, and I'm watching from somewhere, and everyone's crying. Was that real?" Crystal's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. James looked at her. "That was just the confusion from your stroke, Mom," Crystal said carefully. "You probably heard people talking about it and incorporated it into your dreams. But I saw the programs. They had my picture. Those were made by mistake. How do you make funeral programs by mistake? Wouldn't you need to, plan a whole funeral? With a casket and everything?" James was looking at Crystal now, really looking at her. "Crystal, Mom has a point. How did you plan an entire funeral without verifying she was actually dead?" "The facility called me, James. They said she'd passed. I was grief-stricken. I wasn't thinking clearly." "But wouldn't they need permission to release a body? Wouldn't there be paperwork?" I don't know. I trusted what they told me. Another senior moment the next day. James, honey, when did I sign the house over to you? Was that before or after my stroke? After, James said. You signed the papers at the facility. I did? I don't remember that. What did the papers say? That you were transferring the house to me so I wouldn't have to deal with probate. All 3 rental properties too? James blinked. The rental properties? Yes, the ones on Crandon, Marquette, and Exchange. Did I sign those over to you too? I don't know about rental properties. Crystal stood up so fast her chair screeched. Dorothy, you're confused. You only own this house. Really? Then what are those buildings Marcus and I bought back in the 90s? The ones we collect rent on every month? What happened to those? James was staring at Crystal now. Crystal? What rental properties? She's confused, James. The stroke affected her memory. Or maybe, I said sweetly, the stroke didn't affect my memory as much as you hoped it would. The mask slipped. Just for a second, I saw the real Crystal. Cold, calculating, furious. Then she smiled. Mom, you're tired. Let's get you to bed. I'm not tired. I'm remembering. Funny how that works. Over the next 2 weeks, I kept it up. Little comments, little questions, little moments where the confused elderly woman suddenly seemed very sharp and very aware. I watched Crystal unravel, watched her make phone calls at all hours, watched her snap at James, watched her drink more wine at dinner. And I watched my son start to see her clearly for the first time. Meanwhile, MJ was getting impatient. I could hear it in Crystal's phone conversations, in the way she'd plead with him to give her more time. I know we need to move, baby, but we can't just run now. The courts are watching. There are legal motions filed. If we sell the properties now, it'll look suspicious. We need to wait until things calm down. But things weren't calming down. Things were heating up. At church, I made a point of befriending Shanice Brown, a young woman who'd just graduated from college and was working as a paralegal at a law firm downtown. Shanice had grown up in the congregation, and she remembered me from when I taught Sunday school. Ms. Dorothy, she said one Sunday over coffee in the fellowship hall, I heard about what happened, with your daughter-in-law thinking you'd passed. That must have been so traumatic. It was confusing, I said. And now I'm trying to figure out what happened to some of my property while I was in rehabilitation. I signed some papers, but I don't remember what they said. Shanice's eyes sharpened. Property papers. Ms. Dorothy, do you know what you signed? Not exactly, but my attorney thinks someone might have taken advantage of me while I was sick. That's elder abuse, financial exploitation. Ms. Dorothy, if you need help, the firm I work for specializes in these cases. I smiled. That's very kind of you, Shanice. Maybe you could talk to my attorney. Her name is Patricia Henderson. Patricia Henderson. She's a legend in elder law. Ms. Dorothy, if Pat Henderson is your attorney, you're in the best hands possible. What Shanice didn't know yet was that Pat had already talked to her firm's senior partners about my case, that they'd already agreed to take it on pro bono if needed, that we were building a case so airtight that Crystal wouldn't be able to breathe. By week 10, the banks started flagging Crystal's accounts. Pat had filed fraud reports with every financial institution where Crystal had moved my money, and they'd started freezing accounts, demanding documentation, requiring Crystal to prove that every transfer had been legitimate. Crystal came home one afternoon and threw her purse across the living room. They froze my accounts, she said to James. The bank froze my goddamn accounts because someone filed a fraud report. Why would they freeze your accounts? James asked. Because someone's claiming I stole from your mother. Did you? The question hung there like smoke. How can you even ask me that? Because I don't understand what's happening, Crystal. My mother supposedly died, but she didn't. We supposedly own properties I never knew about. You supposedly moved into this house with my permission, but I don't remember giving it. So, yeah, I'm asking. Did you steal from my mother? Crystal's face went red. Your mother is confused and paranoid because of her stroke. She doesn't remember what she agreed to, and now she's making me out to be the villain. Then show me the paperwork. Show me what she signed and when she signed it. It's all at the lawyer's office? Then let's go get it. Crystal grabbed her purse and stormed out. James sat there on the couch, his head in his hands, and I shuffled out to sit next to him. Mom, he said quietly, tell me the truth. Did you sign over the house to me? James, do you remember me ever talking about wanting to give you the house? No. Do you remember me ever being worried about probate or estate taxes? No. Do you remember me ever doing anything major without talking to you about it first? No. He looked at me and his eyes were red. She's been lying to me, hasn't she? I think so. Baby. About everything? I think so. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where he'd grown up, where his father had taught him to ride a bike and shoot basketball and be a man. Dad would be so disappointed in me. Your father would be proud of you for seeing the truth, even when it hurts. The final piece fell into place on a Tuesday morning when 2 police detectives showed up at the door asking for MJ Wilson. Crystal went pale. I don't know anyone by that name. Really? The detective said. Because we have evidence that he's been operating a property fraud scheme from this address. We have phone records showing multiple calls between this number and his number. We have witnesses who saw him entering and leaving this property on multiple occasions. I want a lawyer. That's your right, ma'am. But we're not here to arrest you. We're here to arrest Marcus Jr. Wilson. If you see him, tell him to turn himself in. There's a warrant. After they left, Crystal locked herself in the bedroom and didn't come out for hours. I could hear her crying, could hear her on the phone with someone, probably MJ's lawyer. That night at dinner, Crystal was a different person. Quiet, subdued, her eyes darting around like a trapped animal looking for an escape route. James, she said quietly, I think we should sell the house. This house? Yes. We could use the money to move somewhere new. Start fresh, maybe out of state. James put down his fork. Why would we move out of state? Because there's nothing keeping us here. Your mom has her health back. She doesn't need us anymore. We could go somewhere with better opportunities. Crystal, we can't sell this house. It's my mother's house. It's your house now. She signed it over to you. Show me the papers. I told you, they're at the lawyer's. Then give me the lawyer's name and number, and I'll call them myself. Crystal's face crumpled. Why are you being like this? Why don't you trust me anymore? Because my mother was supposedly dead, and you planned her funeral without making absolutely sure she was gone. Because there are properties I never knew about that are suddenly in your company's name. Because the police just showed up looking for your cousin, who apparently has an arrest warrant. Because none of this makes sense unless you've been lying to me from the beginning. She started crying, but they were angry tears now, desperate tears. I did this for us, James. Everything I did was for us. Your mother doesn't understand. She's from a different generation. She doesn't know how to build wealth, how to leverage assets. I was trying to help. By pretending she was dead? That was a mistake. Was it, or was it convenient? Was it your plan all along? Crystal stood up from the table and pointed at me. She's turning you against me. That old woman has been poisoning you against me since she came back. She can't stand to see you happy with someone else, can't stand that you chose me over her. I chose you, James said quietly, because I thought you loved me. Did you? Or was I just another mark? The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Crystal grabbed her purse and her keys and walked out, slamming the door behind her. We heard her car start. Heard the tires squeal as she pulled away too fast. James sat there at the table, staring at his plate. She's not coming back, is she? He said. I don't think so, baby. He nodded slowly. Good. Crystal didn't come back that night, or the next night, or the night after that. But I knew she hadn't run yet. She still needed to liquidate the properties, still needed to access the money she'd stashed in various accounts. Running without the money would mean admitting defeat, and Crystal hadn't built her entire life around scamming vulnerable people just to walk away empty-handed. She was planning something. I could feel it. Pat called on Thursday morning with news. Dorothy, Crystal's attorney, just filed a petition to have you declared mentally incompetent. I'd been expecting this. It was the obvious move. If she could get a court to declare me incompetent, then everything I'd signed would stand, and anything I said about fraud would be dismissed as the confused ramblings of an elderly woman with cognitive impairment. What do we need to do? You need to pass a cognitive evaluation. I've already arranged for Dr. Simmons to see you tomorrow. He's an expert in geriatric neurology, and he's testified in dozens of competency hearings. If he says you're competent, Crystal's petition will be denied. And if he says I'm not, then we have a problem. But Dorothy, you're one of the sharpest 70-year-olds I know. You just need to show the doctor what you've shown me, that your mind is perfectly fine and you know exactly what's happening. Dr. Prace. Simmons turned out to be a kind man in his 60s, with gentle hands and patient eyes. He spent 3 hours with me, asking questions, testing my memory, my reasoning, my ability to understand complex information. Mrs. Washington, he said finally, you've had a stroke that's affected your mobility, but your cognitive function is intact. Your memory is excellent, better than most people your age who haven't had strokes. You understand the legal situation you're in? You can make informed decisions about your care and your property, and you're fully competent by any standard we use. So Crystal's petition will be denied? I'll make sure of it. But Crystal wasn't done. If she couldn't get me declared incompetent, she'd try another angle. On Saturday afternoon, Adult Protective Services showed up at the house. A tired-looking woman in her 40s with a clipboard and a concerned expression asked to speak with me privately. Mrs. Washington, we received a report that you're being financially exploited by your son, that he's forced you to live in substandard conditions while he and his wife live in the main part of the house, that you're not receiving adequate medical care or nutrition. I need to ask you some questions. I knew Crystal had filed the report. It was a desperate move, trying to paint James as the abuser so she could position herself as my protector. Ma'am, I said, I'm happy to answer any questions, but I want you to know that my son is the kindest, most caring man you'll ever meet. He has never, ever hurt me or exploited me. If anyone has tried to take advantage of me, it's my daughter-in-law. I showed her the guest room, which was clean and comfortable, with my own bathroom and everything I needed. I showed her the refrigerator full of food. I showed her my medications, all properly labeled and up to date. I gave her Pat's number and Dr. Simmons' number and the number for Pastor Williams at my church. Mrs. Washington, she said after an hour of investigation, it's clear to me that you're being well cared for. I'm going to close this case, but if you ever need help, please call us. After she left, I sat down and called Pat. She's desperate, I said. She's trying everything she can think of. Good. Desperate people make mistakes. We just need to wait for her to make the big one. The big mistake came 3 days later. James came home from work early and found Crystal in the house. She'd let herself in with the key she'd never returned, and she was in my room going through my things. What are you doing? James asked. Getting my stuff, she said, not bothering to lie anymore. I left some things here. In my mother's room? Some of my jewelry got mixed in with hers. But her hands were full of papers, not jewelry. Papers from my dresser drawer, papers I'd kept hidden, papers that included the deed to the house, bank statements, insurance policies. Put those down, James said. They're mine. They're my mother's. Your mother signed everything over to you, which means they're yours, which means as your wife, they're half mine. You're not my wife anymore, not after what you did. Crystal's face went hard. You don't have proof I did anything wrong. You have a confused old woman making accusations, but you don't have proof. Actually, I said from the doorway, we do. I held up my phone, showing the recording app that had been running this entire time. We have you on tape admitting you took my papers. We have you on tape from the past 3 months talking to MJ about selling my properties. We have you on tape planning to divorce James after you'd stolen everything. We have recordings, photographs, witness statements, and bank records. Crystal, we have everything." Her face went from hard to pale to red in the space of 3 seconds. "You can't use those recordings. It's illegal to record someone without their consent in Illinois." "Actually," Pat said, appearing behind me, "Illinois is a 2-party consent state for private conversations. But this is Dorothy's house, and she had every right to record conversations taking place in her own home to protect herself from potential exploitation. A judge will absolutely allow these recordings as evidence of elder abuse and fraud." Crystal looked at the 3 of us, me, James, and Pat, and I saw the moment she realized it was over. Everything she'd planned, everything she'd worked for, all the months of manipulation and lies and careful construction of a false reality, it was all falling apart. She lunged for the papers, trying to grab them and run, but James caught her arm. "Let go of me. Not until you give those back to my mother. They're mine. I earned them. Do you know how hard it is to play the loving daughter-in-law to some old woman who never liked me? Do you know how hard it is to pretend to care about family dinners and church services and all the boring shit your mother thinks is important?" There it was. The truth finally, without the mask. "How hard it is to pretend to love you," she continued, turning on James now. "You're weak, James. You're soft. Your mother made you soft. You could have been something, but instead, you're just a mama's boy who never grew up." James let go of her arm like it had burned him. "Get out," he said quietly, gladly. But before she could leave, Pat stepped in front of the door. "Actually, you can't leave. Detective Morrison is outside, and he has some questions about property fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. Also, the FBI wants to talk to you about wire fraud and money laundering. Apparently, moving stolen money across state lines makes it a federal case." Crystal's face went white. "I want a lawyer." "That's your right. But those detectives outside have a warrant for your arrest, and MJ's already been picked up. He's talking, Crystal. He's telling them everything about your operation, about the previous husbands, about the properties you've stolen. He's trying to cut a deal." I watched all the fight go out of her. She slumped against the wall, and for the first time since I'd known her, Crystal looked small. "I almost had it," she whispered. "I was so close." "You were never close," I said, "because you forgot something important." "What?" "You forgot that old black women don't die easy. We've survived slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, and every other thing this country threw at us. You think a con artist and her boyfriend were going to take me down? Baby, you were outmatched from the start." The detectives came in and read Crystal her rights. She didn't say anything as they handcuffed her, didn't look at James or me as they led her out to the patrol car. We watched from the porch as they drove away, red and blue lights flashing in the growing darkness. "It's over," James said. "Not quite," I said, "but we're close. If you've ever had to fight for what's yours, if you've ever had to stand up to someone who underestimated you because of your age, drop a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe, because we're about to get to the reckoning, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when Dorothy finally gets her complete justice." The meeting was scheduled for Saturday morning at Greater Mount Zion Baptist Church, in the conference room where the deacons usually met to discuss church business. Pastor Williams had agreed to mediate what I'd told him was a family reconciliation meeting between me, James, and Crystal. What I hadn't told him was that Pat would be there with evidence of fraud, that Ms. Johnson would be there as a witness to Crystal's lies, and that Detective Morrison and his partner would be waiting outside in case Crystal tried to run. Crystal's lawyer had gotten her released on bail 2 days after her arrest. $20,000 paid by MJ's family, or so she'd told James when she called, begging for one more chance to explain everything. She'd cried on the phone, said she could explain it all, said there had been misunderstandings and mistakes, but that she still loved him and wanted to make things right. James had listened to her pleas with a face like stone. Then he'd told her about the meeting, told her Pastor Williams wanted to help us work through our differences, told her that if she really wanted to reconcile, she needed to show up and be honest. She'd agreed immediately. Too immediately. "She thinks this is her chance to manipulate me one more time," James said after he hung up. "She thinks if she can get me alone with Pastor Williams, she can cry and play the victim and make me doubt what I know is true." "Let her think that," I said. "Let her walk in confident. It'll make the fall harder." Now it was Saturday morning, and I was sitting in that conference room with my walker beside me, wearing my best church dress, the navy blue one with the white collar that Marcus always said made me look dignified. Pat sat to my right, her leather briefcase on the table in front of her. Miss Johnson sat to my left, her hands folded in her lap, her face set in that expression she got when she was about to watch justice be served. James sat across from me, looking older than his 35 years, his eyes tired but clear. Pastor Williams stood at the head of the table, Bible in hand, looking like he regretted agreeing to this meeting, but was too committed to back out now. "Sister Dorothy," he said, "are you sure you want to do this? Family matters can be resolved privately, with prayer and—" "Pastor," I said gently, "what's about to happen here isn't just family business, it's criminal business. Oh, and it needs witnesses." His eyebrows went up, but before he could respond, the door opened. Crystal walked in, and I had to hand it to her. She'd dressed for the performance. Simple black dress, minimal makeup, hair pulled back in a modest bun. She looked like a woman who'd been through hell and was desperately seeking redemption. Her eyes were red-rimmed, like she'd been crying all morning. "Pastor Williams," she said, her voice breaking, "thank you for agreeing to mediate. I know I've made mistakes, but I want to make things right with my family." She looked at James with such longing, such apparent love, that if I hadn't known better, I might have believed her myself. "Please, James," she said, "please let me explain." James said nothing. His face was unreadable. Crystal sat down, and her eyes landed on Pat's briefcase. Just for a second, I saw fear flicker across her face. Then it was gone, replaced by that mask of humble repentance. "Before we begin," Pastor Williams said, "let's open with prayer." We bowed our heads. Well, most of us did. I kept my eyes open, watching Crystal, watching the way her fingers gripped the edge of the table, watching the way her knee bounced beneath the table, the only sign of nerves she couldn't control. "Heavenly Father," Pastor Williams prayed, "we come before you seeking truth, seeking reconciliation, seeking your wisdom in resolving the conflicts that have divided this family. Guide our words and our hearts. In Jesus' name, amen." "Amen," we all murmured. Pastor Williams looked at me. "Sister Dorothy, you called this meeting. Would you like to begin?" "Yes, Pastor, I would." I reached for Pat's briefcase, and Crystal's eyes followed my hand. "Crystal," I said, looking directly at her, "you told everyone I was dead. You held a funeral. You collected donations. You sold my properties. You forged my signature on legal documents. You planned to divorce my son and disappear with everything my husband and I spent 40 years building. Did I miss anything?" The room went dead silent. Crystal's mouth opened and closed like a fish. I didn't. "Mom, you're confused." "I'm not confused." I pulled out a folder from Pat's briefcase. "I'm very clear, and I have evidence." Pat opened her briefcase and began laying out documents on the conference table, like cards in a poker game. Each document was labeled, organized, damning. "Let's start with the death certificate," Pat said, pulling out a certified copy. "This document states that Dorothy Washington died on August 15th at Roseland Community Hospital Extended Care Facility. It's signed by a Dr. Michael Chen, except Dr. Chen doesn't work at Roseland. He works at St. Bernard's, and he's never treated Dorothy Washington. The signature is forged." She placed the document in front of Pastor Williams. "Next, we have the funeral home contract. Crystal signed this on August 17th. 2 days after the supposed death, claiming to be Dorothy's daughter and executor of her estate. She ordered a closed casket service, paid for with a combination of life insurance money, which she shouldn't have had access to, and donations from the church community. Another document. Pastor Williams' face was getting darker. Then we have the property transfers. 3 quitclaim deeds, supposedly signed by Dorothy on September 3rd, transferring 3 rental properties valued at approximately $850,000 to Prestige Property Holdings, LLC. Except Dorothy was in rehabilitation on September 3rd, heavily medicated and barely able to hold a pen. We have medical records showing her condition on that date, and we have handwriting analysis showing the signatures were forged. Pat placed the medical records and the handwriting analysis report side by side. Crystal's face had gone from pale to gray. "I can explain." "Let her finish," James said quietly. "We also have recordings," I said, pulling out my phone. 3 months of recordings of Crystal talking to her boyfriend, Marcus Jr. Wilson, planning the entire con. "Would you like to hear them, Crystal? Or should I just play the highlights?" I pressed play on one of the recordings. Crystal's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. "The old woman signed everything over. She doesn't even remember doing it. Give me 2 more months and we can sell the properties. James is so easy to manipulate. He believes everything I tell him. We just need to wait for her to die, or we can help that along if needed." Pastor Williams stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "Dear God," he whispered. "There's more," Pat said. "Crystal's real name is Crystal Denise Patterson. This is her 3rd marriage. Her first husband, Charles Montgomery, died in a fall down the basement stairs 2 years after they married. She inherited his plumbing business. Her second husband, Robert Hayes, died of a heart attack before their divorce was finalized. She got 2 of his dry cleaning stores. There's a pattern here." Pat pulled out police reports, marriage certificates, death certificates. She laid them all out like a prosecutor building a case, which is exactly what she was doing. We also have evidence that Crystal and Marcus Jr. Wilson have been running property fraud schemes since 2010. They target elderly property owners, marry them or befriend them, forge signatures, transfer assets, and then either wait for the victim to die or help them along. The FBI is currently investigating at least 6 cases across 3 states. Ms. Johnson spoke up for the first time. "I was there when you held Dorothy's funeral, Crystal. I watched you cry over that empty casket. I watched you hug people and accept their condolences and collect their money. And the whole time, you knew Dorothy was alive." "I thought she was dying," Crystal said, her voice rising. "The facility told me—" "The facility told you nothing," Pat interrupted. "We spoke to every staff member at Roseland. No one called you. No one told you Dorothy had died. You made it all up." I played another recording, this one of Crystal talking to MJ. "I told everyone she died, held the whole funeral. It was perfect. No one suspects anything. James signed over the house. He thinks he's helping his poor dead mother's estate. The rental properties are already in the LLC. We can sell them as soon as the market improves." James's hands were shaking. He stared at Crystal like he'd never seen her before. "You lied about everything," he said. "From the very beginning, you lied." "James, baby, please, don't call me that. Don't ever call me that again." Crystal turned to Pastor Williams, desperation written all over her face. "Pastor, please. I made mistakes, but I was trying to help the family. Dorothy is old. She doesn't understand modern finance. She was sitting on assets that could have been—" "Stolen," I said. "The word you're looking for is stolen. You don't understand the pressure I was under. James wasn't making enough money. We had bills we needed—" "What you needed," James said, his voice like ice, "was a mark, and you found one. My mother buried my father 3 years ago. She had a stroke and was vulnerable. She had property. She was perfect for your con." Crystal's mask was completely gone now. The humble, repentant daughter-in-law had vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating and trapped. "This is all James's fault," she said suddenly, pointing at him. "He's the one who pushed me to get the properties in his name. He said he wanted to make sure everything was secure, that he wanted to protect his mother's assets. I was just doing what he asked." James laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's your play? Blame me? You wanted the money, James. You wanted the nice car, the nice clothes, the lifestyle. Don't act like you didn't benefit from all of this. I thought my mother was dead. I thought I was inheriting from her estate because she died. Did you? Crystal leaned forward. Or did you just not ask too many questions because it was convenient? When I told you your mother wanted to sign over the house, you didn't call her to verify. When I said she'd signed the property papers, you didn't check. When I said she died, you didn't demand to see her body. You took my word for everything because it was easier than facing the truth. The words hit James like physical blows. I watched my son's face crumble, watched him realize that she was right about that one thing. He'd been willfully blind because the truth was too ugly to look at. James didn't know, I said firmly. He trusted you because that's what you do when you love someone. You manipulated that trust. Crystal turned on me. You're just a bitter old woman who couldn't stand that your son chose me over you. You never liked me, never wanted James to be happy. I never liked you, I agreed, because I saw what you were from day one, and I was right. She turned to Pastor Williams. Are you going to let her talk to me like this? Are you going to let her accuse me without any real proof? Crystal, Pastor Williams said, his voice heavy with disappointment. I just listened to recordings of you planning to steal from Dorothy. I just looked at documents showing you forged her signature. I watched you fake her death and lie to an entire congregation. What more proof could anyone need? Those recordings are illegal. You can't use them in court. Actually, Pat said calmly, we can. Illinois allows recording in one's own home for safety purposes, and Dorothy had every reason to believe she was protecting herself from exploitation. A judge will absolutely allow them. Crystal stood up so fast her chair screeched backward. This is insane. You're all insane. James, we can fight this. We can say your mother has dementia, that she's paranoid, that she's making all of this up. Sit down, James said. James, please. Sit down. Crystal sat, but I could see her eyes darting toward the door, calculating escape routes. You know what's funny? James said. The week you told me my mother died was the same week you had me sign all those property papers. I remember now. You said Mom wanted everything settled before her surgery, that she was worried about complications. But she'd already had the stroke. She was already in rehab. You were already planning to fake her death. He looked at her with such disgust that Crystal actually flinched. You used my grief. You used my love for my mother as a weapon against me. I loved you, Crystal whispered. No, you didn't. You loved what I could give you access to. My mother's properties, her money, her life. I was just the key to unlock it all. Crystal tried one more time, turning to MJ's favorite defense. Marcus was the one who planned everything. He told me what to do, he forged the documents, he set up the LLC. I was just following his instructions because I was afraid of him. Marcus Jr. Wilson has already given his statement, Detective Morrison said, stepping into the room. I hadn't heard him come in, but there he was, standing in the doorway like divine justice in a cheap suit. He's cooperating fully with our investigation, and according to him, this was all your idea. You're the one who identified Dorothy as a target. You're the one who seduced James to get close to the family. You're the one who planned the fake death. Marcus was just the technical support. Crystal looked at the detective, then at the door behind him, then back at all of us sitting around the conference table. I could see her mind working, weighing options, calculating odds. She lunged for the door. James caught her arm, but she twisted free. She made it 2 steps into the hallway before Detective Morrison's partner stepped in front of her, blocking her path. Crystal Patterson, Detective Morrison said, pulling out his handcuffs. You're under arrest for elder abuse, financial exploitation, identity theft, forgery, and wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent, Crystal screamed. It wasn't a scream of fear or surprise. It was a scream of pure rage, the sound of someone who'd spent years perfecting a con, only to watch it unravel in a church conference room on a Saturday morning. "This isn't over," she yelled as they cuffed her. "I'll fight this. I'll prove you're all lying. James, tell them. Tell them I didn't do this." But James said nothing. He just watched as they led his wife away, his face empty of everything except exhaustion. The trial took 8 months. Crystal's lawyer tried everything, claiming the recordings were inadmissible, claiming I was mentally incompetent, claiming James had been the mastermind and Crystal was just a victim of his manipulation. But the evidence was too strong, the pattern too clear, the recordings too damning. The jury took 4 hours to find her guilty on all counts. Crystal Denise Patterson was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison for elder fraud, identity theft, forgery, and wire fraud. Marcus Jr. Wilson got 10 years for his role as a repeat offender. Both were ordered to pay restitution of $850,000 plus damages. All my properties were returned to me. The house, the 3 rentals, the car. Even the money Crystal had drained from my bank accounts. The court ordered it all restored. Most of it came from seizing assets Crystal and MJ had hidden in various accounts, but some came from selling the Cadillac Escalade and the expensive jewelry Crystal had bought with my money. James filed for divorce the day after Crystal was arrested. It was finalized 3 months before her sentencing. He moved back into the house with me, into his old bedroom with the Michael Jordan posters still on the walls. Some nights I'd hear him crying through the walls, mourning not for Crystal but for the life he'd thought he had, for the man he'd thought he was. "I should have known," he told me one night over tea in the kitchen. "Dad always said I was too trusting, that I needed to pay more attention." He was right. "Your father also said you had a good heart," I reminded him. "That's not a weakness, James. It's a strength. Crystal exploited it, but that doesn't mean it's something you should lose." We rebuilt slowly, my son and I. He went to therapy, worked through the betrayal and the shame and the guilt. He started attending church more regularly, not just on Sundays, but for Bible study and volunteer work. He started helping other families at the church, especially elderly members who lived alone, making sure they had someone to review documents before they signed anything important. One Sunday, 6 months after Crystal's sentencing, James stood up during testimony service and spoke about his experience. The whole church went silent as he talked about being manipulated, about ignoring red flags, about learning the hard way that love without wisdom is dangerous. "If you see an elderly person in your family being isolated from the rest of the family by their spouse or caregiver," he said, "that's a red flag. If you see sudden changes in estate documents or property ownership, that's a red flag. If someone is rushing an elderly person to sign documents without letting them review them or talk to family, that's a red flag. Don't ignore those signs like I did. Don't assume that love means blind trust." 3 families came forward after that testimony, reporting concerns about elderly relatives. 2 of those cases turned out to be legitimate fraud attempts. James's willingness to share his shame had protected other people from going through what we'd gone through. I was proud of him for that. As for me, I used the experience to start something bigger. With Pat's help and funding from my rental income, I established the Marcus Washington Elder Protection Foundation. We offered free legal consultations for seniors, educational workshops on financial exploitation, and a hotline for family members who suspected abuse. I also converted one of my rental properties, the house on Marquette Avenue, into affordable housing for seniors aging out of homeownership. 8 apartments, rent-controlled, with a community room where residents could gather and look out for each other. We called it Marcus House, and there was a plaque by the door. In memory of Marcus Washington, who always planned ahead. James managed the property, screening tenants, organizing community events, making sure every resident felt safe and valued. It gave him purpose, gave him a way to turn his pain into something meaningful. Ms. Johnson became the unofficial grandmother of Marcus House, stopping by 3 times a week to check on residents and organize card games and cook Sunday dinners for anyone who didn't have family nearby. And Crystal? I heard she got early release after 5 years for good behavior. Last I knew, she'd moved to Arizona and was working at a call center, forbidden by the terms of her parole from working with elderly people or handling anyone's finances but her own. Sometimes I wonder if she thinks about us, about the life she could have had if she'd been honest. But then I remember that people like Crystal don't think that way. They only see marks and opportunities and ways to take what they want. She'd do it again if she could, but she couldn't, and that was enough. It's been 2 years since I came home from rehabilitation to find my own house painted a different color and my life erased like chalk on a sidewalk. 2 years since I stood on that porch with my walker and realized my daughter-in-law had thrown me a funeral. Some people ask me if I hate Crystal for what she did. The answer is no. Hate takes energy, and I need all my energy for living. But I won't lie and say I forgive her either. Forgiveness is for people who show remorse, who acknowledge the harm they've caused and want to make it right. Crystal only showed remorse when she got caught, and even then it was just another performance, another attempt to manipulate her way out of consequences. What I feel toward Crystal is something colder than hate and harder than forgiveness. It's knowledge. I know what she is. I know what she's capable of. And I know she'll do it again to someone else if she gets the chance. That's why the foundation work is so important. That's why James and I speak at community centers and churches across the South Side, telling our story, teaching people to recognize the signs of elder fraud. In Black communities especially, where generational wealth is precious and rare, where families have fought for decades to accumulate property and assets, these cons are devastating. They don't just steal money, they steal legacies, futures, the dreams of ancestors who sacrificed everything so their children could have more. Gentrification has made it worse. Properties that were worth $50,000 20 years ago are now worth $500,000. Elderly Black homeowners who've lived in their neighborhoods for 50 years suddenly have assets that make them targets for people like Crystal and MJ. People who see opportunity in every elderly person living alone, in every widow grieving a spouse, in every family too busy to check on grandma as often as they should. We have to protect each other. That's what I tell audiences when I speak. We have to pay attention to our elders, involve them in decisions, make sure they're never isolated enough to be vulnerable. We have to ask questions when things don't make sense, even if those questions feel disrespectful, because predators count on our politeness, our desire not to cause offense, our assumption that family or caregivers have good intentions. Crystal counted on all of that. She counted on me being too sick to fight back, on James being too trusting to question, on the community being too busy to investigate. She almost got away with it. But she forgot something fundamental about Black women, especially Black women my age. We've survived too much to go down easy. We've outlasted Jim Crow, survived poverty, buried children and husbands and parents, held families together through every storm America threw at us. We've got steel spines and iron wills and a stubborn refusal to let anyone tell us we're finished before we decide we're done. Crystal told everyone I was dead, and in a way that old Dorothy did die. The woman who came back was stronger, wiser, and wouldn't ever be silent again. The woman who came back knows her worth, knows her power, knows that age is not weakness but accumulated wisdom and experience and strength. I'm 70 now. I walk with a cane now instead of a walker. Physical therapy has been good to me. I still live in my house, the one Marcus and I bought in 1988, the one we filled with 40 years of memories and love and hard-won stability. James lives here with me, not because he has to, but because he wants to. We cook Sunday dinners together, host church gatherings, open our home to anyone who needs a safe space. The rental properties are thriving. James has expanded Marcus' house to include a second location, and we're looking at a third. The foundation is helping dozens of families every year, preventing exploitation before it happens. And me? I'm living my life exactly the way Marcus and I planned, with dignity, with purpose, with love for family and community, with the satisfaction of knowing we built something that lasts. Crystal tried to steal that from me. She failed. And that right there is the sweetest victory of all. So let me ask you, wherever you're watching this from, have you ever had someone try to take advantage of an elderly family member? Have you seen the warning signs but didn't know what to do? Share your story in the comments. Let's help each other stay vigilant, stay protective, stay strong. And which city are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. I'd love to know where my story has reached. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the elders in your life, if it reminded you to check in on grandma or grandpa or that elderly neighbor who lives alone, hit that subscribe button. Share this story. Let's spread awareness about elder fraud and financial exploitation. Let's protect our communities the way Dorothy protected hers, because at the end of the day, we're all we've got. And we owe it to the generations who came before us to make sure their final years are spent in dignity, not in being preyed upon by people who see dollar signs where they should see human beings. Thank you for listening to my story. May God bless you and keep you and your elders safe. And remember, never underestimate an old black woman. We've been surviving the unsurvivable for 400 years. We're not about to stop now.